I am Dr. Nadia Millington from the LSE, and I am one of you, which is why this is so exciting, right? Because I did my master's here, I did my MPhil here, I did my PhD here, and clearly I didn't get the memo that you're supposed to leave after you spend 7 years here, so I stayed on, and I actually I'm the Deputy Director of the new Masters in Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and also the Deputy Director of the Innovation Lab. And this is why, to me, it's so exciting to actually bring entrepreneurs here in your presence to actually discuss their journey, particularly because what I'm finding out by educating my students is we can create 1 million courses for them on entrepreneurship, but the real learning happens when real people who do it in the real world come and talk about their journeys, talk about what we call golden nuggets for success, things that they experience, things that they learn along the way that you could not read in a textbook. So that's the purpose of tonight, actually. We're going to meet 3 amazing entrepreneurs who have been doing it for real, right? We're going to actually walk through their entrepreneurial journeys, and we're also going to ask them to tell us some of the things that they learned along the way that's really unique, really help them in their journey to progress, and also help them to sort of define their path forward. So without further ado, I want to introduce you just to the names, and then I'll introduce you to them when they come up to speak. There's Pierre Gaubert, the co-founder and CEO of myGwork, who's at the end. Say hello, Pierre. Awesome. There's Saidat Giwa-Osagie, who's the founder of Adorli. And then there is Ryan Kalish, who's the co-founder of Allocator. Before we get started, I have to tell you the rules of engagement, because of course this is LSE and there are rules. The first one, of course, is can we please ask you to take off or turn down your phones? This event is being recorded and you can access it online after. The second is that there is no fire alarm test scheduled for this moment or for the next hour and a half. So what I would like to suggest is that if you hear an alarm go off, it's not a test, it's not a drill, please leave the building and don't think that we're just testing something. Very importantly, the LSE staff will be available to help you find your way out of the building safely. And finally, what I want to do is to just kind of get a sense of the room. How many people in the room are actually entrepreneurs or are interested in an entrepreneurial journey? Yes. And can I get a sense of what industries are you guys? Is it IT? Anybody? So not technology, IT technology. Yes? Services and HR? Yes? And what else? Manufacturing? Okay. Yes. What am I missing? Transport. Okay, awesome. As I said, what's really important is that we have a diversity of opinions here, and maybe what would be really exciting is as our presenters come up to give you sort of their stories, and as I said, their golden nuggets, it would be exciting knowing sort of your audience to kind of target your audience as you present. So let's get started, because it's not about me, it's about them, okay? So we'll start with Pierre Gaubert. Along with his twin Adrian, he's a co-founder and CEO of myGwork, which is an LGBT and social recruitment platform to help candidates identify inclusive employers, mentors, a network, and to hear about professional LGBT events and news. He's the co-recipient of the Young Entrepreneur Award of 2015, and is also ranked number 38 in Financial Times Future LGBT Leaders in 2016. So without further ado, can we welcome Pierre to the stage, please?
Hello, everybody. So for those of you who don't know what LGBT means, it means lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So I co-founded myGwork, which is like a LinkedIn for LGBT professionals and graduates. We work with organizations like PwC, JP Morgan, or EY to connect them with LGBT talent and make sure that LGBT professionals and graduates can find better job opportunities, can find mentors, news, and can attend LGBT plus events. So first, I'm going to start to tell you my personal story, not to talk about myself, but because I think behind a product or a service, it's always good to have a drive that is personal and authentic. So I come from a small village in France, and when I came out to my mom when I was 18, she said, well, are you sure you want to be gay? Because you won't find any job, and you won't have any friends. So I said, well, Mom, I'm gay. I can't choose to be gay. That's the way I am. So then I went on to university, and I was able to be myself. But then when I got my first job, I remember what she said, because it stuck to me, and I said, maybe it's better if I don't come out to my boss, because then I won't be able to be accepted and get the job. That's what I did. I hid for 6 months. And when I came out, my company was not supportive at all. They made fun of me for being gay. So then I had two choices, either complain to HR and try to change the company, or quit and work for a better company. So I thought, well, look around. There is no women in management. There is no visible LGBT role model. So the best I can do is quit and find a better company. So then I talked to my twin brother and co-founder, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a platform where actually LGBT people could be celebrated and by companies that want to hire diverse talent? So we went on with my twin, and we created myGwork. So, but it's not enough to have the idea. Is there a market for it? So you have to know that 1 out of 5 millennials, which are people between 20 and 30 years old, identify as something else than heterosexual, so that's LGBT+. Over 600 million, that's the amount UK businesses could have saved if they were more inclusive, so where people could be themselves. So this is people trying to hide who they are because they are afraid to come out, so they perform less because they try to hide their true self. So then it's counterproductive, and just become lies. 50% is the number of employees who would have stayed with the employer if they've been able to come out. So this relates to attrition rate. So companies lose a lot of money when they lose employees. 46% is the amount of people that encountered homophobic behavior in the workplace last year. And double is the amount of LGBT people that are educated compared to their straight peers. Well, so now it doesn't mean that LGBT people are smarter. It just means that minorities often try to thrive because they feel that they always need to push more to be accepted against their straight peers. Now we had the government passed the Equality Act in 2010, which encourages private and public sector to hire more diverse talent. So that could be ethnic minorities, women, and LGBT people. And also we saw a rise in LGBT networks within companies. So for example, Santander, JP Morgan, all these big corporations have affinity networks where the employees can get mentors, they can celebrate their differences. So we saw that companies were really engaged with diversity. So the revenue stream. On one side, you have the users of the platform, the candidates, that use the platform to come and network and find jobs. And then you have the companies, so the corporates, that pay us to advertise jobs on the platform, and for employer branding. So for example, we do articles in the press to celebrate role models. We go to Student Pride. So for example, So here, for example, we created a brochure that we distributed at Student Pride last week, where we featured various inclusive employers. So now I'm going to give you some tips for you maybe to take away to succeed in your journey. So one thing, keep it simple. So when I first started myGwork, we wanted also to sell to small businesses. For example, a bookstore that wanted to attract LGBT customers, but they realized it's too complicated. People don't understand what are we selling. Are we selling job posting? Are we selling corporate advertising? Or are we selling LGBT-friendly businesses? So we decided to reduce the number of offering to 2. Then be online ASAP. If you're not online today, you are nowhere. So as soon as you have your idea, start building your website and your content. So you can get SEO. So SEO means search engine optimization. The more you have content about your business, the more you're going to be ranked on Google. And I think Google is the best marketing platform that is out there. If people type the keywords that relate to your business and you are ranked in the first 3 results, then you're going to get more customers. Sell a story to the press, not a product. So for example, an LGBT LinkedIn is attractive, but you need something else. So what we did with my twin brother, we sell the business as gay twins started an LGBT LinkedIn, and that was very powerful for the press to pick up. This is more for people that are not from English-speaking countries. So when I first started myGwork, I was always afraid, maybe with my French accent, that is very thick, as you can tell, it would be hard for me to get on the phone, it would be hard for me to get in front of customers, or maybe I'm even too young for that. Well, no, you are your product, and you can sell it better than anyone. So don't be afraid. Then you have to inspire trust and be personal. So, for example, today I was asked to participate in Naked Attraction. I don't know if you know the TV show. So it's a dating TV show on TV where people go naked and start dating. So, of course, I said no because I want to inspire trust to my customers. If I start going naked on TV, then it won't really relate to the corporate world I'm trying to build. And also, early-stage investors don't only invest according to numbers, they invest in people. So my investors, for example, I have the ex-CEO of BP that invested in my company, trusted me and my twin rather than profit numbers. And then you have to show proof of concept and traction. So traction doesn't mean profit, always. It also means how many users do you have on your site, how many customers are interested in your product, what type of customer do you have. For example, for me, it was extremely important to get big names. That was a major metrics for me. And then you should apply for schemes like SEIS or EIS. I don't know if some of you are aware of these schemes. So these 2 schemes, when you apply for it, your investors can get a tax relief of 50%, up to 30, from 30 to 50%. So for example, if they invest, let's say 100K in your company, they will get 50K back from the government as a tax relief, and then they will get a further relief on their capital gain. So this is quite attractive for investors.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to hold the questions until all 3 speakers present. So we're going to go on to Saidat Giwa-Osagie, who is the founder of Adorli. It's quite an interesting platform because it's an upcoming digital beauty platform around this concept of kind beauty. Her mission, which I think is a beautiful one, is to create a space which showcases beauty entrepreneurs that really celebrate individual beauty. But Saidat is so much more than that. She's actually a technology and culture writer. She actually has a patent pending for an autonomous in-vehicle innovation, because of course she's from LSE and we do it all. So in addition to her platform, she's really a tech person. Her master's actually was at LSE in 2013, and she got a distinction in the MISD program, which is Management, Information Systems, and Innovation. So without further ado, let's get Saidat here.
Hello everyone, good evening. So today I'm going to be talking to you about my entrepreneurial journey with Adorli. So what I'm going to cover is the inspiration behind Adorli, the opportunity for Adorli, the market space that we're operating in, our business model, and also some of the things that I've learned along the way. So my inspiration, as you can see, is a shelf full of beauty products. And for me, this really was the starting point for Adorli because it was born out of my frustration of not being able to find products that I was looking for, even when I'd go into a shop. And as you can see, there's a multitude of products. And so I would go in, armed with the research I'd done before, watching YouTube videos or checking reviews online, and I'd go in, I'd already have this information. I'd look at the products. It still wasn't what I was looking for. I'd ask someone in the shop, actually, can you help me find this product that does this, this, and this, and this? And the response I would get is, they all do that. Now, I know that isn't true, but I would end up leaving with a sense of frustration that even with having a multitude of all these products here, I still wasn't able to find something that I wanted to use. And thus the idea for Adorli was born. So what I'm really inspired by with Adorli is that as much as it's a digital marketplace that showcases different brands and has people from all over the world with their own version of what they think is beautiful on it, it's really about being inspired by nature. A lot of the brands that we have on the platform, they have products that they've used, and they've used natural products and natural ingredients to create these products. So really what I'm inspired by is the brilliance of nature, in that you have all these different elements and you can actually create something with it. I think there's something quite entrepreneurial about that in itself. I'm also inspired by celebrating individual beauty. Now, I think a lot of us will be familiar with the phrase standard of beauty. There's a standard of beauty, right? What does that mean? And a lot of the time when it comes up in conversation, it's really about there's a certain way that is admired or respected or revered in our society, and that is the standard of beauty. But actually, if you look at the world, it's not just, even in London alone, that's quite diverse, but if you look around the world, there's so many different people, there's so many people with different experiences, different things that they've gone through, or just life experiences that they have. To say that there's one standard of beauty, to me, just doesn't ring true. And so Adorli is a place where we celebrate individual beauty. It's not about attaining a certain standard or looking a particular way. It's really about each individual being their own standard of beauty and finding products and people that speak to that and speak to them in that manner. I'd also say that I'm inspired by the creativity of the brand partners that we have on the platform. These are people that have looked at products, they've gone into all the big shops, they've tried to find everything, they've not found anything that suits them. So what have they done? They've gone out and they've actually created something themselves that they thought could actually serve and help other people. And so when I come into contact with those people, I find it quite inspirational in of itself, and it's the reason why I wanted to create a platform to showcase all these amazing niche brands that maybe don't have the big name kind of press or presence that other brands do, but they're still doing amazing, amazing stuff. So the opportunity, okay. Well, as I was saying, it's quite challenging to find suitable products. Speaking to people who would fall under kind of our remit of what we would consider a customer, that fall into our demographic, they've said that they spend ages opening lots of tabs online, trying to find different things extensively, and spending a lot of time just looking for something simple. So for Adorli, it's really about beauty made simple. It's about beauty that isn't hard to find. It shouldn't be hard to find, because it should be that every person has the opportunity to have something that speaks to them. There's also a knowledge gap when discovering new products. There's the regular channels of finding things, i.e. through the press or by doing lots and lots of extensive reading and things, but to find that information up front and quickly is a challenge. And so with Adorli, what we're trying to do is create a platform where that information is easily and readily available, so that if you're looking through a range of products, you know which one that is most suitable for you. In addition, I think there's an opportunity for us to really come in at a time where we're having changing mindsets about beauty. I think we're in a phase where we're talking about the diversity of beauty and embracing people's individuality and saying, well, actually, you yourself owning that is a standard of beauty. So I think Adorli can really come in that space and be a place of reference where people can say, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm interested in, these are the things that I'm looking for, therefore I'm going to find it on Adorli. That's the plan, anyway. Also, I would say that we're really about kind beauty, and that's beauty that's kind to the environment, whether it's eco-friendly, cruelty-free, kind to yourself. If somebody's using a product and it makes them itch, or they have a reaction to it each time, but they're still using that product isn't kind to them. So we're really about finding products that are available for people so that they just find products that work for them. In terms of the market, what I will say is that for looking at natural products or organic products, products that are kind of slanted towards using what nature has given us, we're at a space right now where that interest is growing. In the UK, there is growing interest in natural and organic beauty. The UK organic beauty market is an estimated 75.5 million. And that was in 2017. That's gone up 24% since 2016. So there's a growing demand in the UK. But it's not only in the UK, there's also a growing demand in the world. Globally, we're looking at personal care and well-being products that are in the global organic space. That's estimated to grow to $15.5 billion by 2020. So we're not only seeing it here or in pockets, it's not just something that's happening in little spaces, it's something that's taking place globally. I would also say as well that everyone knows that the story of e-commerce is that, oh, everything's moving online, but with organic beauty products in particular, what we're finding is that the channel of distribution is moving from being chain stores or having those big outlets. It's actually that these beauty brand entrepreneurs are finding that they can build up interest and they can also find their own customer base online and do it effectively. And so the trend towards that and the interest towards that is growing. And so Adorli is kind of at the intersection of all these three things happening. So the business model is a marketplace. And what happens is that customers go onto the platform, they can look through the different products that are available, select which ones they like, and what they're doing is they're actually buying from a particular partner. So we don't hold any inventory ourselves. Every brand partner that we have has put their own selection of products on the platform. So it's really a place for those two people to meet and have that interaction. And anytime a transaction is made, Adorli receives a fee per purchase. So in terms of what I've learned so far on this journey of building Adorli and getting it to where it is today, I would say the first thing I've learned is that curiosity is an asset. I think it's important to always keep learning, to always look for new things to find out, because as much as you're involved and you have your focus on what you're doing, it's good to have an idea of what's happening in things that are adjacent so that you can then draw the dots together. And that's really how you innovate, is that you're already thinking 3 or 4, 5 steps ahead before anything else. Why? Because you already know what's coming up. I would also say, in relation to that you should keep asking. I think there are 2 very important questions when you're building a business or you're starting up with an idea or you want to solve a problem. You want to ask why and what if, because when you ask why, you're looking at what the status quo is and you're saying, well, why is it the way that it is? When you're asking what if, you're opening yourself up to different possibilities. You'll say, what if? Well, why not? Why couldn't it be that way? Well, who knows? It's your opportunity to maybe build something that speaks to that. Finally, I would say, embrace your mission and your process. And by that, I mean, if you've chosen something and you want to focus on it and say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, then you need to embrace it wholeheartedly, because if you're really into making it into something that is going to be useful for people, you need to go at it with some level of enthusiasm. And when I say some level of enthusiasm, it has to be that you believe in it so much more than everyone else. And I think as well, you have to embrace the process, because there's going to be things that you'll have to do that maybe you didn't see at first or you didn't imagine, but it's still all part of you making it. So I would say keep thriving as well. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Moving right along, we have Ryan Kalish. Again, of course, everyone on this stage is an LSE alum, which is all very exciting to kind of see where sort of we've all ended up. Ryan is the co-founder of Allocator in 2012. This has grown to be the established information sharing platform for institutional investors and the fund managers who invest in those different funds. Before co-founding Allocator, Ryan was actually part of an investment team at Stenham Advisors with $3 billion under management in terms of funds. And during that time, he managed about $30 million portfolio. He also developed a range of quantitative analytic risk management tools, and he graduated from LSE, yay, with a BSc in Management Science in 2009. So Ryan, if you want to come up and tell us about your entrepreneurial journey.
Hi everyone. So thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind introduction.
Let's give him a clap.
Can I?
Yes. Big next.
How do I?
I think you just have to press it. It shouldn't need this, but yes.
Thanks.
And you should just be able to press this side.
Okay. So I was asked to talk around three things really. What has my journey been? What does my company do? And then I had a lot of pressure to try and come up with some golden nuggets of advice or anything I can say which you can't read in Peter Thiel's book or anything like that. So it's a lot of pressure. I just have one slide which just sort of gives a bit of background to what Allocator is. So maybe I'll start with that. Essentially, we are a technology company for investors in funds. These are institutional investors and family offices. So it's pension funds, it's insurance companies, it's sovereign wealth funds, it's funds of funds. And the basic idea is that we help these entities, these firms, to manage the flow of data from the fund managers that they invest in, so that they can really understand what's in their portfolio, what risks are they taking, where they're making money, where they're losing money. And so maybe just to step back a little bit, so as Nadia said, I graduated in 2009, and I actually started in my second year. I did an internship with the fund of funds called Stenham Advisors, and I originally started working with them to help them build out some quantitative models for understanding hedge fund performance, what were the drivers. And that was a really interesting time because it was 2007, 2008, and there was a lot of chaos. And I ended up working for them part-time throughout my third year at university, and then I joined them thereafter. And my role when I joined full-time was to find new funds globally. So I did a lot of traveling, and my specific mandate was global macro funds and systematic trading funds. So there were two aspects. One was find these funds, interview the fund managers, do the due diligence, present that to our investment committee, and hopefully get it signed off. And then once those investments are made, to help with the monitoring process of that. And once all these funds, they tend to report on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a quarterly basis. And I was in a luxurious position that I only had a few funds that I'd pushed the investments forward for that I had to manage. But at a company level, at a team level, there were about 70 different funds that we invested in. So actually keeping track of all of that was a difficult task. And I always wanted to start a company, and that was actually a tough decision to go into a job rather than start my own company when I left university. So in 2012, I resigned, and I ended up working part-time while I was launching two different businesses, and the idea was that hopefully one of them would have some legs. And so originally the idea was to help, I won't go into the first idea because that flopped, but the second idea was Allocator, which quickly took up all of my attention. And I joined up with with a guy named David Tawil, who was an old friend of mine. He was at Credit Suisse, and we launched the company together. And the original idea was to help investors find new funds to invest in. So in my previous position, I remember doing some trips, like let's say I was going to San Francisco and I wanted to meet with biotech funds. So I had to speak to the prime brokers at the bank. I had to try and speak to other investors. And it wasn't as if information was very transparent around who's actually worth meeting. And so the original idea was to have almost like a LinkedIn or a Facebook for that community. And what we found was that it was actually very difficult. We got a lot of funds on board, we got a lot of investors on board, but it was very difficult to get engagement, to get investors to actually use it on a daily basis. They would use it maybe once a quarter when they were actually planning a trip or making a new investment. So we shifted our focus to helping investors with what they actually invested in. And we actually got a family office in the Middle East to pay for it before we had developed it. So, which was a great scenario. Not a lot of money, but it gave us a bit of traction that there was actually something there. And then the idea is that every time a new investor comes on the platform, they invite all of the fund managers that they invest in to report to them through Allocator. So our task is, over the last few years, has been to sign up more institutional investors as clients, and the fund side has really taken care of itself. So today we have thousands of hedge funds, and it's expanded into long-only funds and private equity and across the spectrum. And so they're all good blue chip names that are very secretive and privacy conscious, but the way we've been able to get them on board is through the leverage of their investors. And so that's been really, really powerful. So maybe just in terms of the company, we're around 25, 26 people, and we're broadly split into technology and product, sales and business development, and then client success. And we have a data team that works with our client success team. And we are hiring in pretty much all of these departments. I've put my email address up if anybody is looking for a job. I know we've got a few LSE graduates with us, and so it's always a good sign. And maybe just to, if anyone wants to interrupt me, feel free, but I know the questions are for the end. But I think maybe just to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, and I used to encourage everyone I met to try and start a company, I was very passionate about entrepreneurship. And I think my thinking's changed a little bit. So I started the company in 2012, and it's 5 years. It's been a lot of hard work, and the upside is really significant. But it's a hard process, and on the weekends it doesn't leave you. It's stressful. It's all consuming, and I think what I didn't take into account was the managing people, and keeping 25 people happy that's a huge undertaking and a job in itself. So I think anyone who's thinking about starting a company, or I think entrepreneurship's awesome. I would certainly, I feel like it's the only path for me, but I think it's something very personal, and I think the hardest thing that we do in our lives, aside from family, is try and find that product market fit between what we're good at, what we enjoy, what feels natural, and a career. And so much of that is not determined by us. If you're in a job, you have managers, you have, and if you start your own company, you have customers. So I think it's just really important to think about if entrepreneurship is right for you, and be honest with yourself. And I think the real entrepreneurs, it'll be an obvious question. And if there's a lot of hesitation, just know that through the tough times, and in every business there are tough times, that grit is really what's necessary to keep moving forward and have some success. And I think there's no such thing as an overnight success. Good businesses take time, it's organic, it's driven by client feedback, there's a life cycle, it just doesn't happen overnight. The other thing is, I think if you are going to start a company, I think there are really, the way I see it is that there are two types of companies. You can start a company that's where you're trying to maybe more B2B, where you're signing bigger contracts, and there's a long sales cycle, or in the other end of the spectrum, and there are varying degrees to this, but on the other end of the spectrum, you can start a business trading. You can, in simple terms, if you open up a restaurant, if you sell on Amazon, if you do any e-commerce, or anything consumer-driven, it's much quicker. The pace is much quicker, and you see profit much quicker, but then it's much more competitive. And those two types of businesses are very, very different to manage. And they take different types of skills, and different type of people enjoy those two different things. And it could even just be, some of my friends that are most successful have done things that are completely different. Maybe gone into property or something completely different. And so I just think it's really important to think about that, and not focus on the idea. I think the idea is really, really almost unimportant. It's more about, do you want to start a business? Do you have the wherewithal to see it through? What kind of business do you want to start? Don't be too protective of your idea. Try and get feedback as early as possible. Try and be vulnerable and get clients to be very honest with you. And I also think there's a lot of marketing and a lot of PR out there around entrepreneurship, and so many buzzwords. And I've been involved in some of those things around fintech or whatever it is, SaaS and VC and all these terms that get thrown around. And I just think it's really important to focus on the organic aspect of the business, and just try and cut that all out. Just listen to customers. What are they telling you they want? Build what they want if you decide that it's within your area of focus, and that's really all that matters. I have a few other things I could talk about, but I don't know how much.
No, definitely.
Okay. I think maybe just a word on competition. I think competition has a negative connotation if you're in a competitive market. But what I've found is that you also don't want to be in a market where there's no competition, because it's a sign that there's no business there, that there's no opportunity. So don't be scared about competition, and just try and be different. Listen to customers. If customers are telling you that they need something, that they want something, they've done the research. Everybody's pitched to them. There is an opening. But I would be more scared of going into a market that had no competition than a market that had some competition. But at the same time, you have to obviously have an opening to create a business. And in an ideal world, there's some competition, but the best case scenario is that there's some sort of property in the market. Usually it's network effect, where there will be a winner, and there will be a monopoly or close to a monopoly that's up for grabs. I think that's the most sort of attractive market. I think branding is really important. Just what a business looks like. That's what people see. It's so easy to create a website on Squarespace, on Wix, on Weebly, and to create a logo. And I just think it's so important to be different to that, and to look really authentic and interesting, and that costs money. So I think as soon as you can do that, obviously don't do it too early until you have some traction, but I think that's really worth spending money on. And we've seen a huge return on capital investment in that sense, in terms of buying a good domain name, investing in good graphic design, in website, that kind of thing. Maybe just one other side note is I'm obviously one of 2 co-founders, and I think if you do choose to go into business with someone, that's obviously such an important decision. And I think, so David and myself are 50-50 partners in the business. For a bit of context, David came out of banking, so he had some finance knowledge, but I really came with the idea and the domain expertise. But we work well together, there was good energy. And I think we've been very lucky that it's worked out. We get good energy from each other, and we have complementary skills. David's an awesome salesperson. I'm much more product focused, much more technology driven. And I mean, it's obvious, but I just think that's such an important decision. If you are going to go into business with someone, just don't let it happen by accident, because it's very, very difficult to reverse that. And just try and be really honest about the person you're going into business with. What are the soft skills? I think forget about the equity split. I mean, that's easy to say, but I think only think about having unequal portions if it's so obvious and necessary. But I just think it's irrelevant. What's important is that the business is sustainable, that it can go on and be successful, and that you work well together. And it's just like a marriage, it's much better to have a partner. I think having a partner is much better than being alone. But getting into a bad marriage is much worse than being single. So that's one piece of, I don't know what the conclusion is, but that's just something I would really stress that you think about if you are thinking about going into business with someone. And equally, going into business alone, don't underestimate how important it is to have support and people to bounce ideas off of. And it's very easy to be arrogant until you get knocked by everything. Everything will be against you. Starting a business is really, really tough. So you just got to have the grit, and whatever can give you that grit to keep going, I think that's really important. So I think that's kind of it.
Oh, awesome, thank you. It's so interesting. I do this session with a lot of global social entrepreneurs. We bring them in from all over the world. We're having a session in 2 weeks. And it's so interesting that consistently across many entrepreneurs, the same sort of golden nuggets come up, right? About partnership and the relationship, about really understanding your identity and you are your brand even more than the company. And the idea of like new markets even in crowded spaces, and how do you kind of create a niche there. So now comes the exciting part of today. Not that the first part wasn't exciting, but I'm really very, very happy that we're now going to open up the floor to your questions. And the way this is going to work is we're going to take 2 questions at a time. If you want to ask a question to a specific person, you can mention it, or if not, we'll open it up to the panel, and then I will repeat the question just in case someone else doesn't sort of hear the question in the room. Okay? So let's start. Anybody? Questions? Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so we do have 2 questions. So they're all about the fact that these are technology platforms. And because they are technology platforms, the first question is sort of how technical in terms of the skill set exists amongst the entrepreneurs. And secondly, how did they sort of operationalize their platforms, what strategies they had, and did they outsource it, did they partner? So let's start at the end with Pierre.
Before starting my platform, I used to work for a software company in sales, so I had some idea of technology. But then I went to Upwork.com. It's like a freelancer platform where you can get people to design your website and launch it. Upwork. Upwork. And you can get freelancers for about anything, like for marketing, for accounting. But one of the issues we had at the beginning, that the platform was okay, but the user friendliness was not there. So the design was not ideal. So that I couldn't know because I'm not an user experience expert. That's why you have to really make sure that your platform is tested by end users before launching.
So I have a background in web design. I've played about with different web technologies and things like that. So I was able to build the initial version, and so I've been able to do that. In terms of what you've just said about testing with users, I would echo that and say that that's important, getting people on as quick as possible and seeing how do they find the platform. Is it easy for them to use? What are the things that are difficult for them? And then figuring out, okay, then we need to evolve. Because with software, it's not just a one-time product. You're always evolving and always adapting and always making it better. So it's just to be cognizant of that too.
So I actually have quite an interesting story to tell on that front. So I didn't know anything about software development or web development. I knew nothing. So I did a little bit of superficial, Googling on this kind of thing, and I came across things like Ruby on Rails and Python and a few terms which I didn't know about at the time, and I actually hired somebody through Upwork, which used to be called Odesk. So that kind of gives it a vintage. But I hired someone in Lahore, in Pakistan, and so I'd never met the person. Very different time zones, cultural. I think I was just very, very lucky that it worked out wonderfully. And actually, that person hired someone else, and that we built out a little team there. And eventually, we went through an immigration process to bring that person to London. And his name's Hassan, and he sits next to me, and he's been with me for 5 years, and he's awesome. And I think we're incredibly lucky to have him because he's a rock star, and I think to find someone like that in London would be incredibly difficult. But equally, that can go horribly wrong, and I think don't put too much weight on that. But I have subsequently taught myself to code, but at a very basic level that I have a sense for what's going on.
Awesome.
Just I would like to add, if you're mindful of the cost, then it's much cheaper to hire somebody in Pakistan or my developers in Serbia, because you look at something like 1/5 of the cost or 1/3 of the cost that you would pay in London.
Awesome. Any other questions? Yes.
My question is for Pierre.
Yeah.
When you had to convince your investors regarding your business model, what was your strategy in definition of your revenue model?
Yeah.
And because you're basically sort of, matching people with companies, even though you have the extra of encouraging, but still there is a model for revenue generation.
Yeah.
And when you have to present this to your investors, how did you some sort of defend it?
Okay, and one more question? Yes.
To the product development journey, at which point did you realize that this is a scalable product and that you have tenure, passion into a legitimate product?
Okay, so we have two questions. The first one for Pierre, which is really about his revenue model, and how do you convince investors that your revenue model is viable going forward? And then the second question is about actually scalability, which is actually the question that I was going to ask. At what point do you decide, and this is for the whole panel, that what you have is actually sort of a business and not just sort of a lifestyle business, but a real business, and that it is scalable. And this is really important because one of the challenges of entrepreneurs is this idea of crossing the chasm, right? Moving from a small sort of lifestyle business into, a sustainable business. So the second question is about, how do you know when you have something that you can actually drive to scalability? So we'll start with Pierre. Pierre, if you could answer both questions, and then we'll let the other people on the panel sort of answer the question on scalability.
I think my first investors were like in my family. So I think I used the emotional aspect of it and the drive behind it. And then at a larger scale, my first investor was my first client actually, because I already sold to him as well the personal story, and he believed in the product since he bought him himself for the company. And then when I needed like larger investors, I really went to networking events. So I think it's important for people to see you in a professional environment, and how do you interact with customers and potential investors.
And scalability, how do you know that you had something that's worth investing in and scaling?
Well, I disagree with the fact that when you don't have competition is a bad thing. I think that there was a need in the market, but there was nobody answering this need. So I knew that I could have almost every major company in London investing in a product because of the need.
A virtual monopoly.
Yeah.
That's amazing. LSE 101, a monopoly is good. Okay, Saidat.
Right. Well, I would say in terms of scalability, for Adorli, I think the fundamental issue is that people are looking for these types of products. So if you have a situation where somebody is looking for a type of product, it's almost a repeatable type of interaction, to the extent that if they're looking for that type of product, they'll be open to other types of products. There are other people like them within that demographic. And so that's the perspective I've used in terms of establishing, is this something that could be scalable? And because of that, I think yes.
I have a question actually. Just how do you ensure that the people selling on your platform won't sell on their own platform once they get a customer at a cheaper price?
Well, I think they do have their own platform, but I think there's something to be said for being on a platform that celebrates individual beauty, and it's good for them to be on that platform and to reach people in that way. So for them, it's another way of reaching those type of customers, I would say.
Ryan?
So in terms of investment, we actually funded the company through revenue from day one till about year 3 or 4. Which I think was actually a good thing, because it actually forced us to be very creative and a lot of fake it until you make it kind of thing. So there's lots of stories I could tell on that front. But when it came to speaking to investors, I think a few years ago, it used to be possible to raise money based on traction and ideas and future promise, and I think that's still relevant, but it's much more difficult. I think investors have been forced to focus much more on revenue and profitability and unit economics, and so I think if we were capital raising now, I think it's all going to be around revenue, and then to the point about when do you know that that it's viable, that it's a legitimate business. I think it's not as if there's one definable point, because I think that changes over time. But I think for us, what gives me a lot of comfort is renewals. Because we work with annual subscriptions, and if you sell a product to somebody and in our case, they sign up for a year and they sort of take a punt, it might not work, it might work, but when they choose to renew in the second year and hopefully at a higher price, then there's really some validation in that, and I think investors give a lot of weight to that.
I would like something to that. I think my business is the same on memberships. So I think if you can design your contracts that people can renew automatically one year after the other, it's kind of good for your revenue growth. So you don't have to chase invoices every time. The customer would just pay directly.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Any other questions? Yes.
Building off what Pierre asked, Saidat, when you first approached your business partners, was there any kind of resistance to selling their products on their platform, and how did you overcome that?
Okay.
I think.
Just.
For those of you who didn't grow up in the UK, so I'm from Sweden, for example, what made you stay in London to start your business, and in retrospect, do you think that was a good choice?
Okay. So we have a question. The first one is about actually when you're attracting people to your platform and if there's any resistance to, particularly in a B2B business, right? And if there's any resistance when they have their own individual website, that's number one. And the second one is the idea of if you are not sort of British by birth or you haven't sort of been in London for a long time, was there any sort of resistance or any concerns to starting a business? So I assume in England, right? So I think this will be we'll start with you, Saidat, and then we will go to the other participants.
Yeah, well, I would say to answer your question, in terms of speaking to different brand partners, it is about having a conversation with each of them because they all have their own different things and different characteristics. So it's about having that conversation and doing your research up front as well and understanding what type of products they're selling, what their story is, where they're coming from, so that you can then be better prepared to have that conversation and get to that stage. In terms of looking at, is the person resistant or they're not, I think what you want ideally is a match. You want to align and partner with somebody. So even when you have those situations where somebody maybe says, okay, at this time, no, it's good for you to understand why, because that helps inform things that you will then do. You'll look and say, okay, did I present this in a particular way? Could I have presented it different to this type of person or this type of products that they're selling? And it helps you, it informs you along the way.
I want to say, when you build a marketplace or website where you have different brands, I think you just have to be mindful to respect people's brand and their identity. So make sure that your website is not the main brand, but actually, if you're going to advertise their brand, they should be on the forefront of the website.
Good point. And the second question about, the second question about sort of not being British and launching a business in England.
Well, so for my specific market, it was very hard to go back to France because diversity in France is nothing. Like people don't believe that it should be celebrated or should be engaged with. So that's why I decided to stay in England. And also, the community is, as I said, 1 out of 5 people are LGBT. So if you start breaking down the community by country and by different languages, it will be harder to create a big community.
Okay.
So I would advise you, for example, if you want to create a website, just make it in English to start with. And then, I don't think you need a Swedish website, but people speak English, right?
Awesome. Any other?
I think so I think the first question was probably less relevant for me, but in terms of where to start a business, I'm from South Africa. For me, it was never, my family moved across. It was never a question of, I didn't have that choice. Do I go back home? I had moved to London. I think it's very hard to answer that question concretely on where is a great place to start a company. Does it matter? I think it depends so much on the type of business you're starting. I think the UK is a great place to start a company. It's a big market. I think the government is incredibly supportive of entrepreneurship. Pierre talked about EIS and SCIS. These are really, really substantial benefits for investors in startups. And we've had a lot of help from the UK Department of Trade. They have hundreds of people that are specifically tasked with helping small businesses, specifically around exporting. but I think, you know, even if I went back to South Africa, I think there are plenty of opportunities, and I think there are opportunities everywhere. So I would choose where you start a business based on where do you want to live for the next 20 years.
Any other questions? Yes.
Question for Saidat. So when you started out, there must be probably some competitors that are on the website as well. So for example, we can think of large retailers such as like Amazon or other e-commerce giants. And how do you really convince yourself that this is kind of like the right idea for you and that this will gain traction in this particular niche?
Excellent. Any other questions beyond that? Okay, so the question was for Saidat, and it was about the fact that she entered a very competitive market, that there's Amazon, there are other e-platform retailers in beauty. So how do you look at a fairly competitive and sort of polluted and very mature market and decide to kind of enter that market and create a niche within that market that you think is scalable?
I think for me, entering, as you say, quite a crowded space, I mean, it's beauty, but for me, I had looked on all those sites, and my demographic, the people that we're targeting as well, they've also looked on all those sites. They've gone to all those areas, and they've still not found what they're looking for. As somebody creating something and looking at making a platform, for me, it was more of a case of, well, actually, my perspective is my advantage. I'm not Amazon yet, but what I do have is a different way of looking at things. And I think it's almost, when I look at people that say, oh, they have an idea, or they're thinking about business, or this and that, and they'll say, oh, this person does it that way, they do it this way. It's almost like DNA. Whatever you do is going to have your perspective on it. Somebody could have an idea for a social network site, but the way that they're going to think about it is going to be completely different. But we take what we see as a given because it's what is the commonly known popular thing, but that doesn't necessarily hold. And I think where you go in between those spaces and don't necessarily take those things and just say that's as it should be, that's where you're able to have a competitive difference.
Awesome. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you, obviously when you start the businesses, you have an innovative idea at the start, you get a marketplace or something technology. How do you keep that internal innovation balancing like the customer innovation as well?
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I just have a piece of that. So I think it's congratulations, by the way. I think it's fantastic you've gone into such a crowded market and been able to be successful. My question is specifically how did you say about validating the idea by, you know, it was something personal to you and personal to people that you knew. What specific activities did you do for market research? Did you do survey monkeys? What were the specific activities that you did to say, right, yeah, actually there is a problem here that I can solve, which is different from what everybody else is doing?
Okay. And there was another question. Yes. Okay, maybe I'll wait till another round. Okay, so the first question, and forgive me if I get this wrong, but I think your question is about how do you balance sort of innovating the idea and changing the business model, but also developing and meeting client needs. So you almost have like a dual perspective and two gods to serve in the business, and how do you balance that? And the second one is very specific to Saidat, which is about, in this crowded market space, what did you do to kind of validate your initial instincts about the niche that's available to leverage, okay? So I will start with, actually, I'll start with Ryan. Ryan, how do you balance the sort of dual goals of like making your client happy, but also feeding your dream and your idea?
I was actually going to say, can you come back to me?
We should have had a signal under the table, like, no, okay. I can do you last. We can start with Pierre. Pierre, how do you balance that?
How do you balance client needs and...
Client needs and your dream. Like, you have an idea of where you want this to go, but the client doesn't necessarily always align with where you think you want it to go, what you want to do.
Well, what I want, I mean, for my idea of the dream is for the LGBT community to be empowered. So then what client needs, I can answer that as long as they pay memberships so I can sustain the platform. So for example, if I went to Santander and I sold them a specific package, and they came back and they say, actually, Pierre, we don't have enough video content. Can you provide video content? Well, I don't have any videographers, but of course, yes, I can. And I went to outsource somebody from Upwork to do the video for them. So you just need to ask questions and understand what they need.
Has there ever been a time when a client wants something that does not align perfectly with where you want to take your website?
Yes, sometimes they asked, so they were not there in the journey yet of diversity, so they wanted more training and how to get to be more diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't do that because we are more in the on the other hand. So once they are diverse and they want more diversity, then we help them.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we can do that as well, and we subcontract to different advisors.
Okay, awesome. Saidat. Mm-hmm.
So I would say, in terms of my my business, I'm quite aligned with, I would say, the brand partners, because they want to sell products and I want them to sell products on my platform. So we don't have that issue so much. What I would say is that in terms of taking feedback of things, so people might say, okay, they want this feature, they want shipping enhanced to do this and this and this. It's taking that feedback on board and saying, okay, how many people do want this? Is this something that can be implemented? Is it something that's actually viable? And then taking it from there.
So can I add something? Also, when the client asks something and you can't do it for technological reason, you can just say, actually, thank you very much for the feedback. We will take it into account for the next platform. And that's fine.
Okay.
I think it's a great question and probably can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. But for us, we always wanted to build something that's scalable. And the first thing that we latched onto was the fact that every time we bring on a new investor client, they bring on all the funds that they invest in. And so our coverage gets better and better, which means that getting the next investor on is that much easier. Because we already have half the funds that they invest in, or now it might be 80%, and that in itself builds up a barrier to entry for a competitor, because a new company starting in the space wouldn't have the funds reporting to them already. So why would a potential client go with them over us, where we already have good coverage? So that was one sort of guiding principle that we stuck to. But we have a constant battle in terms of giving clients what they're asking for, and potential clients, which is even more tempting, building new features, and I think we're just constantly weighing that up against what is it that we think we stand for, and where do we want to be, and what is aligned with that, and we just can't be all things to all people. So I think it's a great question.
Me too. Excellent question. I think you said you had 2 questions?
Yeah, my first question is, how would we take you to get from Ideation to London? And my second question is about marketing. What's been your main source of getting new clients? Obviously, you have different businesses, like Saidat's business, it's more to consumers, whereas you guys, it's more
B2B.
to businesses.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing that?
Can you repeat the second question? Sorry. Oh, awesome. The first question is, how do you move from ideation to when you have a viable idea to launch? How long did it take you? And the second question is, we have 2 B2B persons up here and then 1 B2C, and sort of the initial marketing, like where do you focus your marketing in order to develop your business? Oh, I get to choose. I keep forgetting. I'll start with Ryan.
Sorry, just remind me the first question again?
The first question is just how long did it take from ideation to launch? Yeah. And then the second question is sort of what are the key things that you focus on in marketing?
So the first question, how long did it take us? I mean, in general, the theme is from idea to building something to getting clients. All I can say is the piece of advice that I wanted to say earlier that I forgot to say is just try and make that as short as possible and as cheap as possible. Any business that you come up with, an idea, when you really strip it down, and stripping it down is a real skill, it can be done it can be tested. It can't be done well, and it's going to be ugly, but you can get a basic proof of concept or some feedback that'll give you the permission to keep going. And I think you can do that. You should be able to sit down in the morning and say, what's the test I can put together? And between Google Drive and Google Sheets and Wix and all these tools that are available, by the end of the day, you should have something very basic, even if it's just an email list or whatever, to test it. And try and just give yourself as much runway, as much time as you can, by spending as little as possible in that process.
I would say for Adorli, we are launching actually this spring, summer. So for me, in terms of the idea, the first thing I did was, I thought, okay, this is an interesting idea. I actually just contacted people. I just found different brands. I went to those places, and I guess this ties into the marketing question as well. I thought, okay, where are these customers likely to be? Start getting involved, start having conversations with those types of people, finding out what are their pain points, what are the things that they like, what type of products are they looking for. So it was almost a parallel process in place at the same time, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I would say in terms of ideation, it was checking, okay, this is something that people want. People are actually interested in this. And then for me, it was, okay, how do I build this out? And so you're being a bit scrappy. You're trying to put things together and say, okay, this is an initial thing that I've built. Actually, how can I make it so that it's actually usable? And that's kind of been where I've been working on to this point.
Pierre?
Yes, for me, to launch the website took me 4 months. And then to get my first customer, it took me maybe a year and a half. So when Ryan was saying that not everybody is made to be an entrepreneur, I don't think it's true. I think sometimes you just become an entrepreneur. People that know me know I was maybe not the most dedicated person, let's say, at LSE. I like to play. But,
we'll edit that part out of the video.
Still, I think that, yes, it's a learning curve. So then, for me, I realized after 1 year who my customer was. So before I was selling the product to the HR management departments, and I realized actually they don't have money. People with money are the recruiters. So if I want to sell job adverts, that's the people I should target. And then the business went very well, but it was a learning curve. Mm-hmm. And in terms of marketing, I did partnerships. So sometimes you have to give a bit of equity, maybe 1%, to some mentors that are going to help you introduce you to the right people. So one of my mentors introduced me to the head of talent of Thomson Reuters. That's how I got my first deal.
Awesome. Last question, because we have 10 more minutes. Okay. So how did you find your mentor and advisor, and how much equity did you give them? I can do so. Okay. And that's it. I do have one question, and I am a very optimistic person before I ask this question. I can't have you guys here and not ask about failure. You talked about how difficult the journey is, but can you give one anecdote or one story about the point at which there was a failure and how you sort of got over that, and what would you suggest to people who want to become entrepreneurs, or maybe people who are established entrepreneurs, in terms of, failure is part of the whole journey, and what would you sort of recommend to them in order to overcome those failures? So we have two questions. One is about mentorship, which is positive, and then the last question will be about failure, and maybe just giving a story and what happened and how you overcame that, and then we'll close for the afternoon. Okay, let's start with Saidat.
Okay, so I would say in terms of mentorship, podcasts are my friends for that. There's a lot of information and resources out there, so I'm always listening to different people's stories. They may not necessarily even be entrepreneurial, maybe just people that have done something that's amazing, or they have a unique story. I think there's lessons to be learnt from everyone if you listen closely enough. So for me, that's been my point of reference, is listening to different people's stories, how they've overcome challenges, things that they've faced, how they've tackled different things. So I'm always listening, always learning from that. In terms of failure, I would say a moment where something was quite difficult and I wasn't really sure about how to approach it initially was getting the payment processing correct for the platform. So that's, as you can imagine, is a key element of having an e-commerce platform, is you need people to be able to pay on it, and that wasn't working initially, and there was different types of errors that were happening with that. So I would say from that, I learned to take a step back, because sometimes when you're in the midst or the middle of a problem, it's very easy to let it consume you, because it is a big deal. It's not something you can shy away from. But I think from that, I learned that, okay, the problem is here. This is what needs to be the resolution. How do we get from this step to this step, rather than just look at the problem and just stare at it and it gets bigger and bigger. You have to take a step back and then take steps out about seeing how you can resolve it.
Excellent. Pierre?
Yes, in terms of, you said mentors, for me I gave 1% to 3 people. Because after 1 year, or after 6 months, I just knew there was a market, but I couldn't pinpoint like where was the issue with me. So I was missing my customer. So for me it was great. And then if you want, I would say, more influential mentors, once your business is successful, people want to be associated with success, so they will come on board for free.
And Ryan?
So on mentorship, I'm also a huge fan of podcasts, actually. So aside from formal mentors, when I was working at Stenham, before I started my company, I started listening to a podcast called This Week in Startups, which has been going, it's run by a guy called Jason Calacanis, who's based in San Francisco. He was based in Los Angeles. And I think there must be 700 or 800 episodes where he's interviewed everyone. And I listen to that every day, walking to work and back. And I learned a fortune from that. And there's another one called myGwork, MIXERGY, which is run by a guy named Andrew Warner, similar sort of things. I completely agree with Saidat about just, it's almost like a mosaic. If you just listen to, if you just expose yourself to hundreds of stories, it just starts triggering your own thinking. I'm not so into books, for example, but in terms of formal advisors, this is something that we've only in the last year or so worked on, and we've put together an awesome advisory board of people that have expertise in different aspects of what we think we're going to need over the next few years. So we have one person who's a technologist who built a tech company that really scaled really well. We have Andrew Baker, who used to be the CEO of AIMA, which is the industry body for the alternative investment industry globally. We have somebody who comes from a private equity background, and our sort of thinking on this was, and you asked about equity and how do you compensate people. Our thinking was that advisors need to have skin in the game. So we never gave away equity for free. We don't pay anyone. We just tried to encourage these people to invest in the company and to be our first investors. Which, yeah, I recommend that.
Yeah. And then failure?
Failure, it's like every day is a battle. So I can think about it on every level. I think anyone is to, when I look at Elon Musk or people like this, I just can't bear to think about how they sleep at night, and so it's just, I think it's just a feature of entrepreneurship, failure and hardship, and I think it's just, as I said earlier, I really think it's just about grit to see that through and mindset. But we've had, plenty of setbacks along the way. We initially, the reason we didn't raise capital in the first few years is not because we didn't try, but our message wasn't resonating with investors, and we had to learn through that process, and the business changed, as I mentioned, from researching funds and finding new funds to invest in to focusing on funds that what they're already invested in, and we've actually come back to the research side. So it's just been an organic journey, but it's just a fact of entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Ryan is actually clairvoyant, because my last question in every single session that I ever run is about what should everybody be reading or listening to? And he already talked about the 2 podcasts, which I think are terribly interesting, that I'm going to definitely look up. So what should everyone be reading? If it's just like 1 book or 2 books in terms of entrepreneurship, or what should they be listening to?
So I mentioned podcasts, but I don't read that much, but I just finished reading Ray Dalio's book. I'm sure very few people, that's right, Principles. I'm sure very few people don't know who he is, but Ray Dalio runs probably the world's largest hedge fund called Bridgewater, and he released this book called Principles, which is basically 3 chapters, and the first chapter is about his life and his journey in terms of launching an investment company, which is also a story of entrepreneurship. That was my favorite chapter. And then the second chapter is his principles for work, which is it's almost like a Bible in terms of how he runs his business. And then the third chapter is principles for life, and I just think it's a great book. So I bought a copy for each of our staff members before the Christmas holidays.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so at the moment, I'm actually reading a book called Content Inc. by Joe Polizzi, and he is very passionate about using content as a means of messaging and getting out to customers. So for me, it's quite interesting to see how do you message appropriately so that you speak to people and they're able to find out who you are and what you're about. The second book that I would recommend is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. It's a story of Nike and how that came into fruition. It was a really interesting story, and I think it's a testament to his resilience in building that company, because today we all see it and we all take it for granted. Oh, there's Nikes everywhere. But there was a time where that wasn't the case, and it looked like it wouldn't even be what it is today. So it's a really good read. I would recommend that.
Okay, awesome. And the podcasts?
Oh, podcasts. So many. I listen to so many. But I would say one that's really popular, one that people enjoy a lot, is How I Built This by Guy Raz, I think, on NPR. And also NPR Planet Money, which is really interesting. It's about business and different contexts of that. So it's a good listen.
Planet Money.
Yes.
Okay, good. I have a lot of homework to do. And Pierre.
I don't read so many books, but if I have to say 2, I would say How to Set Up an E-Commerce for Dummies. It was gifted by me by a dear friend, and actually I think it gives very practical advice on how to set up an e-commerce business. And the other one is Spin. So how spin selling is how to transform a situation or a problem into a need for a customer.
Okay, and podcasts?
I think I've never listened to any podcast. Maybe one from LSE.
Oh, good plug. I did not organize this. Okay, it's now 8 o'clock on the dot. So, the second book, Spin?
Spin selling. S-P-I-N selling.
Okay. It's now 8 o'clock, so I just want to thank our panel. If you can just give them a massive round of applause.